Well, hello again. Welcome to BibleTalk.tv. Our lesson series in this class is Joshua and Judges for beginners. We're on lesson number 2 of the series, and the title of this lesson is Joshua's Commission and the Crossing of the Jordan. And we will be covering the material found in Joshua chapter 1, verse 1, to chapter 4, verse 24, and hopefully you have read ahead of time the material so that we can just focus on the explanation here in class. So let's review lesson number 1, just to get us back into the context of the material that we're covering. Key points that we've covered so far. First of all, focuses on the leadership of Joshua and the conquest and the settlement of the promised land. That's what this book is about. Judges describes the period after Joshua's death, highlighting the cyclical pattern of Israel's faithlessness and disobedience and the rise of various judges and deliverers that God raised up to help the people during times of oppression. As far as the historical context is concerned, the period we're looking at, approximately 1400 to 1200 BC. And the main theme, if you wish, is transitional. It's the transition from Moses' leadership to Joshua's leadership marks a significant shift from wandering in the wilderness to actually conquering and settling the land that had been promised so long before. We also talked about the significance of the promised land itself. It was a divine promise. The land was promised to Abraham and his descendants as a sign of God's covenant with Abraham and his descendants. The promised land also had a religious and cultural importance. It became the central place for Israel's identity, its worship, and its community life. Then we also spoke of the concept of the covenant, very important concept in the Old Testament. We said that a covenant was a binding agreement between God and His people involving promises and obligation. Promises by God, because He's the only one that can actually keep a promise, and obligations by the people in order to maintain the relationship that they had with God in the covenant. Then we talked about key covenants. There was the Abrahamic covenant, the very first one, the promise of land and descendants. The next was the Mosaic covenant. This is where the law was given to Moses at Mount Sinai. And then there were ongoing renewals and emphasis on various parts of the covenant as far as faithfulness is concerned, expansion of information as far as worship is concerned, the conduct of life, and so on and so forth. And we see these covenant renewals as we go on through the books of the Old Testament. And then finally we spoke about leadership and roles. Moses, for example, led the Israelites out of Egypt through the wilderness and established the foundation of the nation and its laws. Joshua took over and he led the conquest of the promised land itself, Canaan, and the settlement of the promised land by fulfilling God's promises to the patriarchs. We had certain thematic elements in the first lesson. Faith and obedience was one. The success of Joshua and the early judges highlights the importance of trusting and obeying God's commands. Whenever they obeyed God's commands, the Israelites were blessed and they were prosperous. When they fell away and began to practice idolatry, various kinds of disobedience, then their prosperity left them and they were oppressed by various nations around them. We spoke of leadership and legacy. Effective leadership, as seen in Moses and Joshua, and the point that we made about that was that effective leadership has a lasting impact on the individual, and in today's situation, leadership has an impact on the church, and of course the church has an impact on the world. And then finally, the church and the idea of covenant. The covenant relationship involves the entire church. Even today, the covenant was not meant simply as something for the Old Testament. The covenant continues with God and His people in the church today, still emphasizing collective responsibility and faithfulness on behalf of the church. God always being true to His promises. And of course today the promise is not of a particular piece of land, a geography on earth, but the promise is of the promised land in heaven. So in our next lesson, we're going to delve into Joshua's commission and the miraculous crossing of the Jordan River in Joshua verses 1-4. Key themes to focus on in this lesson will be Joshua's leadership and his initial steps in leading Israel. We're going to look at the importance of God's promises and the people's faith in entering the promised land, and of course the symbolism and significance of the crossing of the Jordan itself. We talk a lot about the crossing of the Red Sea when Moses leads the people across the Red Sea that parted. The same spectacular miracle took place when the people entered the promised land. The Jordan River was opened up during the time of flooding. It was opened up and divided, and the people passed through on dry land. So quite a significant event that took place when the Israelites entered the promised land. So as we move forward, I want you to keep in mind the foundational principles of faith, obedience, and covenant faithfulness that we discussed in lesson number 1. These themes are going to continue to be central as we explore the events and the lessons all the way through the book of Joshua. So let's begin with God's commissioning of Joshua in Joshua chapter 1, verses 1-9. The essential elements of Joshua's commissioning in this passage. Joshua 1:1-9 marks a pivotal moment in the history of Israel where Joshua is formally commissioned to lead the Israelites after Moses' death. And this passage outlines several key elements of his commissioning, the first of which is the divine appointment that he received. This passage begins with God speaking directly to Joshua, signifying the transition of leadership from Moses to Joshua. And God Himself states, and I quote, "Moses my servant is dead. Now therefore arise, go over this Jordan, you and all this people, into the land that I am giving to them, the people of Israel." That's Joshua chapter 1, verse 2. And so we see that Joshua is given a clear mandate to lead the people across the Jordan River into the promised land, affirming his role as the new leader. There will be no doubt in Joshua or the people's mind as to his role of leadership. There was no battle for the leadership position. There were no schemes to take over the leadership of the people. It was clear from day one that Joshua was to be the leader who took over from Moses. Secondly, there's the promise of the land in verses 3 and 4. God reiterates the promise of the land, specifying its boundaries from the wilderness and Lebanon to the Euphrates River and the Mediterranean Sea. And so this reinforces the fulfillment of the covenant promise made to Abraham and his descendants. The same land that was promised to the patriarchs centuries before, the exact same land is what God is talking to Joshua and the people about in the book of Joshua. We also see the assurance of God's presence in verse 5. God assures Joshua that He will be with him, just as He was with Moses. Again, I quote, "No man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life. Just as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not leave you or forsake you." That's Joshua chapter 1, verse 5. And so this assurance is meant to be the source of strength and confidence for Joshua, emphasizing that his success will come from God's continued presence and continued support. Next, we have the call to courage and obedience in verses 6, 7, and 9. Joshua, we will see, is repeatedly commanded to be strong and courageous. This call to courage is crucial given the challenges that he'll face in leading the Israelites and conquering the land. It wasn't just a question of crossing the Jordan and saying, okay, you people settle over here and this tribe settle over there. No, they had to conquer the land. There were people who were living there. There were settlements, there were cities, there were fortresses, there were armies that had to be overcome and conquered. So it was to be quite a difficult mission. This is why Joshua and the people are continually encouraged to be strong and courageous, because the task was not going to be easy. The victory was guaranteed, but the task itself was not going to be easy. And of course, in verse 7, God instructs Joshua to carefully obey all the law given through Moses, not turning from it to the right or to the left. This obedience is linked to prosperity and success in all of the endeavors, from farming the land to raising animals to winning military victories. All of these things depended on their obedience to God's law and their faithfulness. And then there's a meditation on the law in verse 8. Joshua is instructed to keep the book of the law always on his lips, meditating on it day and night. This, of course, continues the engagement with God's word and intended to guide his actions and decisions, ensuring that he leads the people in accordance to God's commands. He doesn't lead the people according to his wishes. He leads the people according to what God is telling him. And then finally, there's the encouragement and reassurance in verse 9. The passage concludes with a final encouragement and reassurance, and I read, says, "Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened and do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." And so this encouragement reinforces the themes of divine presence and courage and steadfastness in the face of challenges. And so we move on to the response to Joshua's commissioning in chapter 1, verses 10 to 18. And so after receiving his commissioning from God, Joshua immediately takes action and rallies the people. This passage highlights Joshua's decisive leadership and the people's unified response, demonstrating their readiness to follow him into the promised land. No lollygagging about, well, maybe tomorrow we'll start, or next week, or when the weather is better. As soon as he receives the commission, as soon as he receives the encouragement, Joshua takes action and the people respond. And so we begin with Joshua's command to the officers in verses 10 and 11. Joshua does not hesitate. After receiving his commission, he commands the officers of the people to go throughout the camp and instruct the people to prepare provisions, as they will cross the Jordan River in 3 days in order to take possession of the land. In other words, no turning back. Once we cross over, there's no turning back. So prepare what you have to prepare. We're going on to our mission. And of course, this prompt action showcases Joshua's confidence and readiness to lead, instilling a sense of urgency and purpose among the people. And then there's the special instructions to what we call the Transjordan tribes. This term Transjordan means the people who lived on the other side of the Jordan River, on the east side of the Jordan River. So Joshua addresses the tribes that had selected land on that side of the river, the Reubenites and the Gadites and the half-tribe of Manasseh. And he reminds them of their commitment that they made to Moses when this arrangement was made. Although their inheritance was east of the Jordan, and as I mentioned, they wanted to settle there because the land was suitable for grazing their herds of animals. And so they were the first to help their fellow Israelites in conquering the land on the west side of the Jordan before returning home to settle in their own inheritance. That was the arrangement they had made with Moses, and it was confirmed at this point with Joshua. Joshua emphasizes unity and mutual support, urging these tribes to leave their families and leave their livestock behind temporarily and join in the fight until the Lord gives rest to their brothers, and then they could go back and settle their land. Of course, in the following verses we have the people's affirmation. The people respond positively to Joshua's leadership. They affirm their commitment, saying, and I quote, "All that you have commanded us we will do, and wherever you send us we will go." They recognize Joshua's authority in the same way that they respected Moses' authority, expressing their willingness to obey him completely. And so the people pray that the Lord will be with Joshua as he was with Moses, acknowledging the importance of divine guidance and support for their success. They echo God's earlier command to Joshua, urging him to be strong and courageous. And this mutual encouragement reinforces the collective resolve and confidence in their mission. Interesting to see that God says to Joshua, be strong and courageous. And then Joshua says to the people, you be strong and courageous. And the people speak back to Joshua and they tell him, you be strong and courageous. So everyone, in today's parlance, everybody was on the same page. Everybody was on the same wavelength. They were all focused on the mission. Everyone knew their place. Everyone knew what they had to do, and they were anxious to do it. So Joshua and the people's response to his commissioning highlights several key aspects. First of all, Joshua's immediate and decisive action demonstrates his readiness to lead and instills confidence in the people. You can't get anything done if the leaders are not firmly committed to the mission. When the leaders are not committed to the mission, the army can't follow. And that's the same in the church. When the leaders in the church are not committed to the mission of the church, which is to proclaim the gospel, then they have trouble motivating the individual members to follow through on the mission of the church. Also, the willingness of the Transjordan tribes to honor their commitment and the people's overall readiness to follow Joshua reflected a unified and committed people. You had 9 tribes, or 9.5 tribes if you wish, who were going to cross and take over their land, and then you had another couple of tribes that already had their land. The tribes that already had their land were still willing to cross over and to join in the battle with their brothers in order to help them settle the land that they would eventually have. And so the people's affirmation of Joshua's authority and their prayers for divine presence emphasizes the importance of godly leadership. They were inspired. God inspired the leaders, and the leaders inspired the people. The reciprocal encouragement to be strong and courageous highlights a shared resolve and a trust in God's promises. Everyone, whatever position they held, whether it was a leadership position or a follower position, everyone believed in the mission. Everyone was trusting in God to help them. And so this response sets a positive tone for the upcoming conquest of the promised land, showcasing the people's readiness to move forward under Joshua's leadership, united in purpose and faith. And the comment that I want to make about this whole passage is, this was truly a high point in the history of the people of God. Right here, everyone is united together on a similar idea, focused on a mission, trusting in God, trusting in their leaders. I mean, this is a shining moment for the people of God. Well, as we move forward into Joshua chapter 2, we get into the story of the actual taking over of the land. And the first account is about Rahab and the spies, a familiar story. The story of Rahab and the spies found in Joshua 2 is a familiar and significant narrative in the Bible. As the Israelites prepare to enter the promised land, Joshua sends 2 spies to scout out the city of Jericho, a major city in that area. They enter the city, and the spies do, they enter the city and they lodge in the house of a woman called Rahab. And she was, the Bible says, she was a prostitute. And so Joshua dispatches 2 spies to secretly explore Jericho and gather intelligence on the city's inhabitants and its defenses. Rahab, recognizing the spies as Israelites, hides them on her roof under stalks of flax when the king of Jericho's men come searching for the spies. The news gets out that there are spies among them. She tells the king's men that the spies had already left the city, misleading them in order to protect the spies, and of course taking a great risk for her own safety and the safety of her family. What's interesting is that Rahab makes a confession of faith. She reveals to the spies that the people of Jericho are terrified of the Israelites because they have heard of God's miraculous deeds, such as the parting of the Red Sea and the defeat of the Amorite kings. She expresses her belief that the Lord has given the land to the Israelites. Well, that's her way of confessing her faith. Rahab requests safety for herself and her family in return for her help. The spies agree, instructing her to tie a scarlet cord in her window as a sign, and they promise that anyone in her house will be spared during the impending attack on Jericho. When they see that red cord, they know that that house is a safe house. And so after escaping from Jericho, the spies return to Joshua and report that the land is indeed fearful of the Israelites. And this bolsters Joshua's confidence to proceed with the conquest. So there are significant events that take place in this particular conquest. First of which is the demonstration of God's sovereignty. The story highlights God's control over events, as even a Canaanite woman recognizes His power and she aligns herself with His people. This was her expression of faith. This shows that God's influence extends beyond Israel and that His plans would be fulfilled despite any type of opposition. Rahab's faith in God and her actions protect the spies and illustrate that faith can be found in unexpected places and people. What's interesting is her inclusion in the genealogy of Jesus, which is found in Matthew chapter 1, verse 5. You see her name is there, underscores the theme of redemption and the transformative power of faith. Her faith in hiding the spies and recognizing the power of God was rewarded not only by the saving of her life, but the saving of her soul and the honor of being a part of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the Messiah. And so the spies' successful mission and Rahab's report of Jericho's fear foreshadow the eventual fall of Jericho and of course the successful conquest of the promised land altogether. It reassures the Israelites that God is with them and that their enemies are already demoralized. And so Rahab's story emphasizes the concept of covenant loyalty. Despite being a Canaanite, Rahab's faith and actions bring her and her family into the protection and the blessings of Israel. This inclusion signifies that God's covenant extends to all who believe and act in faith, regardless of their background. She was a prostitute, a common prostitute, and yet her faith in God saved her family, saved her soul, and also gave her an honored position in the story of salvation. And so the narrative of Rahab and the spies serves multiple purposes. It demonstrates God's sovereignty, it illustrates the power of faith and redemption, it foreshadows Israel's victory, and it emphasizes the inclusive nature of God's covenant. And so we go on to the the actual crossing of the Jordan River, which is a significant moment for the people of Israel. And that would be in chapter 3, when they cross over from the east side to the west side of the Jordan River on their way to Jericho, that first battle that they have. And so Joshua instructs the people to sanctify themselves in preparation for crossing the Jordan River, as the Lord will do wonders among them, and we'll read about that in Joshua chapter 3. The officers instruct the people to follow the Ark of the Covenant carried by the Levitical priests, maintaining a distance of about 2,000 cubits, that would be about 1,000 yards, to symbolize the sacredness of the Ark and to guide the people. So the first group to lead the people are the priests, who are carrying the Ark of the Covenant on their shoulder, and they march ahead, 1,000 yards ahead of the people towards the river as the people follow them. Then the priests themselves enter the Jordan. As soon as the priests carrying the ark step into the Jordan River, the waters upstream stop flowing and pile up in a heap, allowing the Israelites to cross on dry ground. This entire nation crosses the Jordan with the priests standing on dry ground in the middle of the riverbed until everyone has crossed over. So imagine the scene. The priests are in the middle of the river, standing on dry ground, holding the ark, and the people are filing across the river in front of them, and they wait until all of the people have passed over before they themselves move on to the other side. In chapter 4, we see them setting memorial stones, an important moment and ritual. God instructs Joshua, after everyone has crossed over, to select 12 men, one from each tribe, to take 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan where the priests stood and carry these to a place where they would camp on that night. The 12 stones are then set up at Gilgal as a memorial to the miraculous crossing of the Jordan River. And Joshua explains that these stones will serve as a sign among the Israelites, prompting future generations to ask about significance. At that very moment, there wasn't somebody writing down all the history. That came after. And so these stones memorialized that particular miraculous action and that particular important moment in the nation's history, when it stopped wandering in the wilderness and crossed the Jordan on dry land in order to conquer the land that they would settle in. The memorial stones are intended to remind the Israelites of God's mighty acts and to reinforce the importance of teaching future generations about the faithfulness and the power of God. And so there, aside from the historical actions taking place here, there are some theological significances about what is taking place here. For example, the priest's role. The priest's role in carrying the Ark of the Covenant symbolized God's presence and leadership. By stepping into the Jordan first, they mediate God's power and they initiate the miracle that takes place. This act demonstrates that the crossing is not by human effort, but by divine intervention. Their role underscores the importance of spiritual leadership and the necessity of God's presence in overcoming obstacles and achieving His promises. He's sending them into the land of Canaan. He's sending them to go conquer the land. They have to first cross the Jordan River. It's at the time of year when the Jordan is flooding. It's flooding its banks. And yet, regardless of this obstacle, God finds a way to get them across the river on dry land. It's also a symbol of faith and obedience. The priest's act of stepping into the flooded Jordan River before the waters part signifies a profound act of faith and obedience. and it serves as a model for the Israelites, showing that faith often requires stepping into uncertain and challenging situations, trusting in God's provision and power. How did they know? Joshua didn't say, now you go ahead and you'll see, the moment you step into the river, you'll see it'll begin to, no. He just said, go ahead, walk into the, walk into the river. And they obeyed. They walked into the river, and then it parted for them. When it comes to faith, we usually have to take the first step. We take the first. God makes the promise, but we have to take the first step. That's why it's called faith. And then as far as the memorial stones are concerned, these were a remembrance of God's mighty acts. The stones serve as a physical reminder of God's miraculous intervention. They are a tangible testimony to future generations of how God dried up the Jordan, allowing the Israelites to enter the promised land. Today we would have taken out our phones and we would have snapped a couple of pictures, before and after pictures, the Jordan River flooding, and everybody's on one side of the river, and then we would snap a couple of pictures of the dry ground, and well, they didn't obviously have cameras in those days, but they did have the memorial stones, something to remember, something to use as a teaching device. And so the act of remembrance is crucial in maintaining faith and ensuring that God's deeds are not forgotten over time. It reinforces the concept of historical memory in the community's faith life. It is also a tool for future generations. The memorial stones are intended to provoke questions from future generations, creating opportunities to recount God's faithfulness and His power. This ensures that the story of God's salvation is passed down from one generation to another, fostering a continuous sense of identity and purpose rooted in divine history. What do I mean by that? I mean, in telling this story over and over again, there are the stones. Why are these stones? What's this memorial all about? The future generations are able to tell the story that explains who they are. We're those people. You're the fourth generation down from these people that God selected and God led through the wilderness, and God crossed the Jordan River on dry ground. You're part of that. Even though that happened long ago to your great-great-great-grandfather, you are part of that. And it comes back to what I've often said about my own prayer life for our children, and that is that there'll be someone in our family still calling on the name of Jesus when Jesus returns, whether that's next year or 10,000 years from now. This is the legacy that all parents should have for their children and their grandchildren, and so on and so forth. Well, and this tool here, these stones, these memorial stones, this served as a witness to link one generation to another to a common idea and a common history. And then of course, it was about the renewal of the covenant. The setting of the stones at Gilgal, the first campsite in the promised land, marks a new phase in the fulfillment of God's covenant promises. It signifies a renewal of the covenant relationship as the people transition from wandering to settling in the land that God promised to their ancestors long ago. And it serves as a reminder of God's faithfulness to His covenant and the people's responsibility to live in accordance with His laws and commands. They see the stones, and the stones remind them of a time when their ancestors came in and took over the promised land, which was promised many generations before. And it says that God keeps His promises. Even though it takes a long time for them to be fulfilled, He always keeps His promises. And so the events in Joshua chapter 3 and 4 emphasize the significance of faith and obedience and remembrance in the life of the Israelites. The priest's role in the crossing of the Jordan River highlights the necessity of God's presence and leadership, while the memorial stones serve as an enduring symbol of God's power and faithfulness ensuring that future generations understand and appreciate their divine heritage. They had a heritage of people that came before them, but what was special about them is that they were the people of God. That was the specialty of the Israelite nation. They were the people of God. Just like today, Christians, we are the children of God. We are God's people. We are God's kingdom, a kingdom of priests. We have to find ways to continually remind our children and our future generations that this is our role, this is who we are in this world. Well, as we normally do in our studies, I'd like to end this class with a couple of takeaway lessons. This time, however, I'd like to share a spiritual application, and then a practical application, and then a timeless application based on the first 4 chapters of Joshua. So here we go. Lessons based on Joshua chapters 1 to 4. First, the spiritual application. The spiritual application is trust in God's promises. Trust in God's promises. Joshua's commissioning and the miraculous crossing of the Jordan River underscore the importance of trusting in God's promises and His timing. The Israelites' successful entry into the promised land was predicated on their faith in God's guidance and their obedience to His commands. In our spiritual lives, we are called to trust in God's promises even when faced with seemingly insurmountable challenges. Like Joshua and the Israelites, we should step out in faith, confident that God will make a way where there seems to be no way. This trust can strengthen our relationship with God and deepen our reliance on His providence. All right, a second lesson, this time a practical application. The practical application is this: the importance of leadership and preparation. Joshua's leadership and the meticulous preparations for crossing the Jordan highlight the importance of effective leadership and thorough preparation in achieving success. Joshua's clear instructions and the people's organized response were crucial for the smooth execution of God's plan. In our daily lives, whether in personal endeavors or professional projects, strong leadership and careful planning are vital. By preparing adequately and leading with clarity and confidence, we can navigate challenges and guide others towards achieving common goals. This principle can be applied in various contexts, from family management to business operations to the smooth functioning and growth of the church. Leadership is very important, whether it be in worldly endeavors or spiritual endeavors. And then the third application is the timeless application. The timeless application is this: the power of remembrance and legacy. The power of remembrance and legacy. The setting up of the memorial stones at Gilgal illustrates the timeless value of remembrance and the importance of passing down stories of faith and divine intervention to future generations. These stones served as a perpetual reminder of God's faithfulness and the miraculous crossing of the Jordan River. The practice of remembering and sharing significant events and lessons is crucial all across the generations. In our lives, we can establish memorials in various forms, through storytelling, journaling, or creating physical reminders that capture important moments and lessons. This helps ensure that valuable experiences and spiritual insights are preserved and imparted to future generations, fostering a sense of continuity and shared heritage. Our ministry, BibleTalk.tv, is all about this idea of preserving solid, sound teaching of the Word of God that can be preserved and distributed and passed on to other generations. This is one of the goals of our ministry. And so these applications from Joshua chapters 1 to 4 provide valuable insights that can enrich our spiritual journey, that can enhance our practical decision making, and of course, ensure the preservation of our legacy and faith for our families and our brothers and sisters in Christ today, tomorrow, and into the future. All right, well, that's our first lesson on the text, chapters 1 to 4. Here is the assignment, as we agreed. I want you to reread chapters 1 to 4. You've read it once. I've given some explanation here in class. Now I want you to reread it with everything that you have received. Hopefully you will gain more insight and understanding by rereading the chapters. And then I want you to read ahead chapters 5 to 8. Remember, you read the chapters at home. I explain the chapters in class. All right, well, that's it for today. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.